Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I would like to welcome you to episode 3 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. I'm the author of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics blog, which you can find on WordPress. I also write. I've written 2 books on the FCPA and recently published my first ebook. The ebook was on GlaxoSmithKline, or GSK in China, a game changer in compliance, and I would like to start off this week's topics with a discussion about China. We continue to hear news out of China. Today, for instance, in the Wall Street Journal, Chris Matthews reported that GSK stock dropped slightly from its high, or where it was prior to the release of the information about the bribery scandal in China. But we also had a very interesting announcement come out of GSK. Apparently they are negotiating with the Chinese regulatory authorities over a proposed fine, and GSK has indicated that if the fine is too high, they will consider pulling out of China. I find this very interesting, where a company would threaten simply to leave an entire market, not because the risk is so high, but because the fine and penalty for their conduct which violated the domestic law of China might be so high. It's a very interesting tactic to use. I don't know if that's cutting off your nose to spite your face, but certainly it's a negotiating ploy that GSK is currently using. Interestingly, News Corp apparently has told the British authorities that if the British authorities indict News Corp as a corporate entity for actions involving the phone hacking and corruption scandal in Britain, News Corp will consider shutting down all of its UK operations. This, I think, takes it a step further than GSK has taken it. And for News Corp to shut down operations in an entire country when, in many ways, it began its rise in the United Kingdom would certainly be a very interesting tactic to utilize. While others here in the United States have tried to downplay the Arthur Anderson effect, I think it is certainly an appropriate analysis, or at least a factor for the Department of Justice to consider when indicting a company, is what's going to be the effect of putting that company out of business. Is that something that the Department of Justice should do? Clearly, I don't think the world is better off for Arthur Anderson having gone out of business. We went from a big 4 to a big 3 in the accounting world. But where do you think all of those accountants went to? They had to go somewhere. So they're still working out there. Nevertheless, very interesting development in China, and also presaged by Newsweek's indication in their negotiation with the British authority. But more than simply GSK, the reverberations from the GSK matter continue really on a worldwide basis. I believe that the GSK matter will be a game changer in compliance, and we've seen a couple of further incidents on that this week. The first is a company called Agilent Technologies, interestingly enough, a HP spinoff, which manufactures testing equipment for medical devices in California, has announced that they are internally investigating allegations of bribery and corruption in China through the use of third-party agents. So we have yet another company tangentially related to the medical, pharmaceutical, medical supply, medical device industry caught up in the China corruption scandal. But more importantly, I think, is that China is actually thoroughly investigating, or at least investigating, officers and directors of some of its state-owned enterprise. The FCPA blog reported that PetroChina's officers and directors certain officers and directors whose names I will not even try to pronounce, are under investigation for bribery and corruption. This speaks to, I think, a holistic effort by the Chinese enforcement authorities. And if you are a U.S., UK, or other Western company and you have operations in China, I think it is absolutely mandatory that you look at your operations to see who you're using for third parties, how you're using them. It may be time to go in and do a forensic audit. You really need to try to get to as much information that you can, credible information, try to get to the bottom of what your operations are in China and are they clean. Additionally, of course, is the J.P. Morgan ongoing matter on hiring. And if you have a Chinese joint venture, Chinese subsidiary, or doing business in China, and you've hired any sons and daughters or other family members of foreign governmental officials, this may be a very good time for you to take a very close look at that hiring process, Was that hiring process taken out of the normal hiring process? Did the candidates have the appropriate qualifications? Were the interviews done? Were credentials checked? And more importantly, what happened on the business side after any family members were hired? Were any new contracts immediately awarded to you? Did you retain business going forward? Those are the kinds of things that the Department of Justice or SEC will inquire upon. I really strongly urge you to take a look at your China operations because it brings me to my third point. And also this was reported in the FCPA blog, which if you don't read it every day is a fabulous resource. Dick Casson is really the godfather of blogging in the corruption space and started his blog I think in 2007. It's a very, very good resource. He posts several articles, blog posts daily, and a lot of the news has been coming out of China. One of which caught my eye, though, was that the Chinese have a enforcement technique they've long utilized, or at least the communist Chinese, of self-reporting, self-disclosure, self-admission. And they have brought that to the corporate world. And apparently the Chinese government has encouraged Western companies to come forward and self-disclose, self-report, self-admit any instances of bribery and corruption, indicating that if they do so, there may be leniency in the penalty. Clearly that is done by the Department of Justice. It's written into the sentencing, if not sentencing guidelines. It's certainly one of the things that prosecutors consider under the prosecutorial discretion on whether there's a self-disclosure. But I think the Chinese are taking that a step further. So if you find that you have credible evidence of bribery and corruption in your China operations, you need to seriously consider self-disclosing this to the appropriate Chinese authorities simultaneously with a disclosure to the relevant U.S. or U.K. authorities. You better have very good counsel in China. So there's some very good lawyers out there, but with the Chinese government suggesting that they would look very favorably upon this, I think that's something that U.S. companies would need to consider. Next, I'd like to turn to HP, and I mentioned these Agilent Technologies as an HP spinoff. It started as an HP subsidiary and was spun out as an IPO. And that brings me to where the situation of HP and their ongoing corruption investigation regarding sale of hardware. This past week, it was announced that the investigation had expanded into Poland. This is a very, 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 very good opportunity for a learning lesson for the compliance practitioner. So let me go back and review some of the background facts of the HP case. HP had a German subsidiary headquartered in Munich, Germany. And this subsidiary made a sale of hardware into Russia. It was into the Moscow prosecutor's office. It was approximately a $44 million deal for hardware. HP paid a one-man agent in Germany a commission fee of $10 million. The day after that agent received the money, that agent wire transferred the money to the Isle of Man, at which point the money has disappeared and the trail's gone cold. The German provincial tax authorities from the province of Bavaria picked up this payment, and they picked it up in a routine tax audit. They referred the suspicious payment or red flag payment to federal prosecutors in Berlin, who opened an investigation. And the federal prosecutors in 2011, I believe, raided the office of HP in Germany, in Munich, and they arrested certain HP officers of the German subsidiary. Apparently HP did not self-disclose this to the U.S. government, and later, I think I may have my year wrong, it was 2010, because in 2011 the Wall Street Journal broke this story. The day after the Wall Street Journal broke the story, the SEC and DOJ announced that they were investigating this matter as well. The matter, of course, initially centered on the German subsidiary. It later expanded to other former CIS states and into Russia, and now it's expanded into Poland. So this is a very good example of the dreaded where else question, where the situation where if you have a systemic failure of controls in one area or one subsidiary, it may indicate that there is also systemic failure of controls in other areas of your corporation. But some of the lessons learned are pretty dramatic in this case, and I'd like to go over one of them with you. And this was reported in the Wall Street Journal. The Journal, when they broke the story, interviewed an employee who was the accountant on the particular deal in question. And that person was a contract HP employee at the time. And he said the following: it didn't make sense. It didn't make sense to him why a one-person agent, a one-man agent, would receive such a large commission when there was no contract in place, no documentation of the work that agent had done, and no indicia of an ongoing bona fide third-party relationship between HP and that agent. But nevertheless, the contract accountant did not stop the deal because everyone else at HP Germany had approved it. Management had approved it, legal had approved it, ops had approved it, finance had approved it. Every other group in the subsidiary had approved it. So he didn't believe that he had the authority to stop the deal. For me, the key is, or there are a couple of keys. The first one is, this is really the best example I can bring to you of a case where if the facts had been elevated or escalated to an appropriate decision maker, perhaps bribery and corruption could have been stopped. Because we had it turn on this one time, or this one point in time rather, where this contract employee said it didn't make sense. If that contract employee had known that he could escalate his concern either via a self-reporting, internal hotline, anonymous hotline, raising his hand, calling compliance, calling the home office in the United States, doing anything to bring such a large payment to a one-man agent where there apparently was not sufficient documentation to justify it, that would have been an opportunity for HP to review it and perhaps stopped it in its tracks. So a very good lesson learned for escalating, the need for escalating, but more importantly the need to train employees on how to escalate, when to escalate. And this includes contract employees. Anyone that's in the chain of payments or dealing with third parties, such as a contract accountant, needs to receive training on your compliance program, but also how to raise a concern. Simply put, if this contract employee had been told, here's our hotline, here's the number, if you have any concerns, cares, or worries, you can call this number, think about what that may have, the difference that may have made. HP is now, they have not disclosed the cost of the investigation, but nevertheless, it was starting in 2011 moving forward. We're over 2 years now, and the investigation apparently, as of this date, has expanded further into now into Poland. So it's a very good lesson learned. It's for how or the need to escalate. Very good lesson learned for the compliance practitioner in training all employees, and it also can show the downside for the dreaded where else question, which is where else has there been a systemic failure of controls. I would like to turn now to an interesting set of facts that came out of South Africa, reported in the Guardian and Mail online edition newspaper, about a company called Goldfields. Goldfields obtained a permit for certain gold mines in South Africa, and there were allegations that they obtained this through bribery and corruption of certain high-ranking governmental officials. The thing that is most interesting about this is in December, Goldfields, who are an American stock exchange listed company, so there is clear FCPA jurisdiction over this matter, is hired the law firm of Paul Weiss out of New York, and for those of you who don't know, that's where Mark Mendelson works. So obviously a very, very, very good firm when it comes to FCPA knowledge and investigation. Anyway, they hired Paul Weiss in December, who did internal investigation and brought forward at least credible allegations of bribery and corruption, and they brought this to the board of directors of Goldfields. Goldfields then terminated the relationship with Paul Weiss, instructed the law firm not to conclude a final report, and did not self-report this. This was all in the Mail and Guardian article. So here you have the situation where Apparently, there are allegations of bribery and corruption brought to the attention of the board of directors, and the board of directors says, no, not only do we not want to know about it, we're not going to report it to the relevant authorities, and certainly in the United States, that would be the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission. This is a very curious conduct indeed, and it could lead to further scrutiny by the DOJ of the company's overall operations, but I'm generally not aware of any situation where a corporate board of directors would take such an action or activity, and I would ask you to consider the contrast with Walmart, where there's no, at least at this point, no allegations that the Walmart board of directors was made aware of corruption allegations in Mexico. So it's going to be very interesting to see this, how this plays out, and what developments may come out from this. That concludes episode 3 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. If you need to reach me, have any questions, you can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Also, my 2 books, Lessons Learned on Compliance and Ethics, and Best Practices under the FCPA and UK Bribery Act, and ebook, GSK in China, A Game Changer in Compliance, are all available on Amazon.com, both in hardcover for the first 2 and ebooks, and then ebook version only for the GSK book. We're going to have some interesting guests coming forward. I hope to have Mike Volkoff,